I am he that laid the foundation of the world. I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the ending. Only some persons shall hear the voice, and when persons desire to come in, the voice will say, Depart. Quit the premises immediately, or you shall hear thunder, for this house is guarded by 12 angels in full armour, and if you do not depart, you will see me as I am, with terror. The year is 1840, in a 3-room tenement on Hendon Lane, Sunderland, England. These words emanated from the room of a sick 12-year-old girl, followed by a loud rumble of thunder and water being called forth by angels, and inexplicably appearing splashed on the doors, puddled on the floor and soaking the bedsheets of the sick girl. Welcome to episode 1 of the Sunderland Poltergeist, series 3 of the Poltergeist Project, and have I got a story for you? There's a lot to go through in this episode, so I've got my coffee ready. If you're new here, thanks for listening. Let me introduce myself and explain a few things. My name's Stephen Miller. I'm a historian with a sceptical interest in the paranormal. Through the Poltergeist Project, I research historic poltergeist cases. Series 1 was all about a poltergeist case from Keighley, and Series 2 was centred on the City of London. I chose to focus on poltergeist cases specifically due to their tangible nature. The evidence isn't a feeling of unease or a sense of being watched or just catching a glimpse of a shadowy figure. It's a table being lifted, a pan being thrown across the room, and intelligent communication. It has a physicality and communality that is hard to dismiss. A practical point. I release these episodes as I'm researching. Right now I haven't completed the research for this series. I don't know how the story develops or what I might discover along the way. I also record these episodes in one take. No editing, no cheesy spooky music or sound effects dropped in, it's just me and the mic. This is primarily a practical choice rather than stylistic. It helps me get the episodes out. I work full time, I've got a family and lots of commitments on my time. I want to spend all my energy for this podcast researching the history, not messing around in production. Before I start on this story, I want to mention a couple of things about the case. Kind of content warnings, really, I suppose. As you will have noticed from the intro, this is a deeply religiously rooted poltergeist case, or more specifically a Christian one, and I don't want to cause any offence. I'm just going to present the story as I find it in historical record. I'm not a Christian, personally. I wasn't raised with any religion, but nor am I anti-religion nor have any antagonism towards it. Belief is personal, and I believe it should be respected as such. At the time of our story, 1839-1840, England was a much more religious country. The vast majority of the population believed in a Christian God, and Christianity, in whatever form, was a hugely important part of people's lives. Also, this is the story with a sick child at its centre, which is obviously not easy to hear at times. So I wanted to flag that up too. In general, I found this case to be pretty intense. It all feels very close and fevered. But as I've started to unpick the narrative, it does feel a bit less full on, so please bear with me as we go through. Today, the Sunderland Poltergeist story is largely forgotten, although it was big news at the time, and it's never been researched in the detail that I'll be attempting. The Curious Britain podcast covered this story in one 20-minute episode last year, but unfortunately it has some factual errors. It's a decent introduction, but it doesn't really go beyond the surface. It focuses on the spectacular phenomena and then leans into some unfortunate tropes about poltergeists and teenage girls. I want to get into the context, the people involved, and to come to some conclusions about what was actually happening, and not ignoring any of the phenomenon that perhaps is less spectacular. Sunderland in this very early Victorian period was a place of huge growth. A booming port town on the northeast coast of England, coal, glass, and most importantly shipbuilding were transforming 3 previously small settlements, Monk Wearmouth, Bishop Wearmouth and Sunderland, into one industrial powerhouse. Sunderland was the biggest shipbuilder in the world in the early 19th century. Famous engineer George Stephenson built the first railway in history to be powered without animals in Sunderland. And the even more famous, I think, Isambard Kingdom Brunel designed the docks which opened in 1837. However, of course, the money of this industrial boom was not shared equally, and large communities lived in or close to poverty. Housing was hastily built to accommodate as many people as possible, leading to slum conditions that endured for 100 years. Tenements, multiple dwellings in one building, were common to maximise space. It was against this backdrop of heavy industry, growth, and working poverty that our narrative unfolds. The houses in Weir Street, Moore Street and Hendon Lane, where our story primarily takes place, didn't even exist 20 years earlier. The land was open and undeveloped before being filled with row after row of dense terrace housing, hardly any of which survives today. Some of the road names are still there, although Hendon Lane is today Hendon Road. But the area was transformed by slum clearances in the 1930s and then Hitler's bombs in World War II. Today it's the area around Hendon Industrial Estate, to the south of Sunderland city centre. The girl at the centre of our story was called Mary Jobson. She was 12 when all this happened to and around her. We know about the story because an Irish doctor named William Reid Clanny published a book about it called A Faithful Record of the Miraculous Case of Mary Jobson. The book includes 59 pages of witness statements presented in witness order. So the narrative is told and retold from the perspective of Mary's parents, her doctors, family, friends and neighbours. It's an incredible document for its detail and how Clanny chose to present the story as a series of witness statements. However, the way it's laid out, witness after witness, I think has led to some of the confusion about it. The overall narrative is quite tricky to extract because it's not told in one nice linear form, and there are slight discrepancies between the witnesses, as you would expect. I think more on Clanny in a later episode. He's obviously a key figure in this, but I have not got round to researching him fully yet. Let's just try and get the narrative laid out. The who, what, where and when. I've mostly taken this from the statements of Mary's father, John, and mother, Elizabeth, as they were the ones there day to day throughout the whole incident. In November 1839, Mary Jobson was living with her father, mother, and two younger sisters in Weir Street. Some people have given their address as Mill Lane, but that's incorrect, based on an address given by one of the doctors, who was mistaken. Mary became very ill. She complained of headaches and that her eyes were very sensitive and sore. She was largely bedbound by the illness. A local doctor, William Gresham, was called, and he attended a few times over a few weeks, but in his opinion she did not need medical assistance. However, she showed no signs of improvement. The following year, in February 1840, the family were told they would have to move, and found a new house just round the corner on Moore Street. On the 4th of February, Elizabeth was cleaning the new house ready for them to move into, when her younger daughter, also Elizabeth, ran in saying that Mary needed her. She returned to Weir Street and could see that Mary was shaken. When she asked what happened, Mary said that she'd been visited by Jesus. He had stood at her bedside table, looking earnestly at her. Mary said he was a beautiful-looking person, and what he told her she was not to divulge until he came again. This apparent appearance of Jesus in a tenement in Sunderland is the start of the strangeness in this story. Up until the 4th of February 1840, as far as we know, Mary had just been ill, with no paranormal phenomenon associated. Around this time, she rallied slightly, and had been able to attend her usual Sunday school at the Wesleyan Methodist Church on South Durham Street. It was known locally as the Tabernacle for an examination. I've seen a photograph of the church, now demolished, and it's a beautiful brick building full of round arches, and it would have been even more spectacular nearly 200 years ago. Mary was able to recite verses and passages of scripture from the Bible, but the following morning she took ill again, and this time she was much worse. She lost her eyesight and was in lots of pain and became prone to violent fits. She told her parents that she wished to die, so they called for a new doctor, Robert Embleton, whose practice was nearby on Coronation Street. He attended their new home on Moore Street on the 9th of February, a Sunday. He found she was in lots of pain, particularly around the back of her head, and her eyes were sore and bloodshot. She was nauseous but not vomiting, constipated, and her pulse was racing at 120 beats per minute. Embleton suggested trying to purge her with leeches and blisters, a common practice at the time, but we know now probably not very helpful. After 2 weeks of treatment, she was, unsurprisingly, no better. The situation was made worse by the family having to move again after just 10 days at Moore Street. Sound must have travelled terribly in those cramped living conditions, and the neighbours had complained to the landlord about Mary's screams. So the family moved again, just around the corner to Hendon Lane, or Hendon Road, as it's recorded on OS maps and is still known today. Her parents asked for a second opinion, and Embleton called for his brother Thomas, also a doctor. He recommended the same course of treatment, but after another 2 weeks, Mary was getting worse. On the 9th of March, she had a very violent and painful episode. Her whole body convulsed and she foamed at the mouth. This was following being unable to eat or drink for several days. It's really sad to hear how ill she was. Mary then lost her voice entirely, and this is when the knocking began. Her mother had left her alone in her room when she heard 3 distinct, loud knocks. On running back in, she found Mary was fast asleep. The knocks continued throughout the afternoon, all seemingly emanating from the area around Mary's bed, but without her being awake. Elizabeth also heard music and singing, the most impressive that could be imagined. Mary told her that Jesus had visited her again, and said, "The doctors may disagree, but there is only one who understood her complaint, and that was Robert Embleton." When John returned home from work that evening, Elizabeth told him what had happened, but he dismissed it as children playing tricks. However, he wanted to check for himself. He sat at the side of Mary's bed as she slept peacefully, with her hands folded across her chest. Then he heard it, 3 loud knocks from the bed area. He jumped up to investigate the room and look out the window, but he could find no other source for the noise. The knocks now became a frequent occurrence in the house, happening at all times of day with various witnesses. Later that week, Elizabeth heard the voice for the first time. It would become a new character or characters in this story. It said, "I am he whom thou knowest not. Be not deceived, for you know not who I am. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending. I told your child she was going to have a long illness, and that I was going to work a miracle with her. She is like young Samuel, who kept his father's laws. For when you desired her to say her prayers and go to sleep, she obeyed, and when the remainder of the family was in sleep, she would arise and on her knees pray without ceasing to her Father in heaven." 2 new doctors were called, Mr. Ward and Dr. Brown, who again prescribed purging treatments. Just before Dr. Brown visited, the voice had told John and Elizabeth things about their family history which they didn't know, but on checking with relatives were found to be correct. They were also told that Mr. Ward and Dr. Brown's advice should not be followed, and that a miracle would be performed on Mary. But John was still suspicious about the knocking and the voices. He had a suspicion that it was all coming from Mary and that the treatments should be continued. The knocks became louder and were often followed by a noise like a rumble of thunder. The tenants below the Jobsons said that they thought the house was falling down at one point. John asked for help with Mary's treatment from 2 local women who came but couldn't administer the leeches and the blisters. She was too distressed and in too much pain. John was then addressed directly by the voice, coming from around Mary's bed. "Will you strive against God?" John, still thinking it was Mary, said that the doctor's orders should be followed, but he was clearly at his wit's end, and that evening a man, I assume from the tabernacle, visited the home, as apparently he did frequently, to give spiritual guidance. He sat with John by the side of Mary's bed as she slept, and John said to him, "You see the child's hands and feet are outside of the clothes. The knocks you hear, a voice you hear. We cannot see the child's lips moves. There is a noise like the clashing of swords. You hear a noise like the crumpling of paper. There is no person in the house except us 3. I hope you see it is neither her mother or myself." The man replied, "The ways of God are unsearchable." John was worried that people had been saying he was stupid and that he was being tricked by someone, but he was adamant he'd examined everything as minutely as he could. The activity was increasing in frequency and variety. More beautiful music was heard from no known source. Footsteps were heard and water began appearing on the floor. Yet again John persisted with the doctor's orders, who still claimed it was all a trick by Mary and that her mother was too particular with her. They suggested an extreme course of action. John was told to take a week off work, to watch his daughter very closely and withhold all food and drink. They were basically trying to call her bluff, trying to starve her into admitting that she'd been faking it all. Understandably, John refused this cruel suggestion. As though witnessing his doubt, the voice now spoke to John again, saying that all the signs would disappear for 2 days, then return again at exactly 8 o'clock. And this they did, with knocks, scratches, and the sounds of clashing swords even louder than before. John was now a believer. Dr. Clanny, who would go on to publish all this, was visiting the neighbours below the Judsons when he called out in curiosity, having heard about Mary's case. As a doctor, he was permitted to check on her, and he tried to take her pulse, but she shrank away from his touch. Her parents asked if she would get better, to which Clanny replied. Now here John and Elizabeth's recollection is slightly different. According to John, Clanny said, "We are all under the care of the Almighty." According to Elizabeth, he said, "All things are possible with God." Either way, this seems to have pleased the voice, who was delighted that Clanny recognised more than all the other doctors that all was ultimately God's will. The signs and the voice continued, and Mary remained bedbound until the 22nd of June 1840. On that morning she was particularly bad, and her parents feared she was dying. At 5 p.m, the voice ordered that Mary's clothes should be laid out in her room, and she was to be left alone, except for her 2-year-old sister Caroline. At 5:15 a voice called out, "Come in!" and on entering they found Mary, fully clothed, sitting in a chair with Caroline on her knee. She appeared perfectly well. So there we have it, the full timeline of the Sunderland Poltergeist, but not yet the full story, I don't think. If you take this case on a surface level, cherry-pick the incidents, condense it all, it can sound absolutely spectacular and totally unexplainable. But I wanted to bring it back to how it all actually happened. Over weeks and months, how the paranormal activity interacted with Mary's illness and the help she was receiving, alongside the family upset of having to move house twice in less than 2 weeks. I wanted to get this down because obviously I'm going to try and pull it apart, to analyse and contextualise it all. There's clearly a very personal context here. Mary was a very religious girl, waking in the night to pray when her family were asleep, and highly skilled in her knowledge of scripture and ability to recite it. We've got several other witnesses who we've not yet heard from, who all came to the Jobsons' house in Hendon Lane and witnessed even stranger phenomena. Full conversations with God, Jesus, and the Virgin Mary, predictions of the assassination of Queen Victoria, celestial paintings appearing from nowhere. There's a lot more of this story to tell. I've also got a lot of research to do on all the people involved and the place and the time. To that end, I've contacted the Sunderland Antiquarian Society, who are the biggest local history group in the country, to see if they can offer any help on the case or even if they are aware of it at all. I could really do with another source for all the activity. Whilst Clanny's book is fantastic, it offers lots of different voices, there is a very strong bias throughout to this being a genuine miracle. All the sceptics, like John, Mary's father, are converted. So let's see what I can find on that. All that will be coming up in the next episode of the Sunderland Poltergeist. Hopefully I have that out in the next couple of weeks, but as I say, I've got a lot of work to do on this one. I just want to say a huge thanks for listening. I really, really appreciate all the kind words I've had since starting this podcast. I'm really enjoying doing it, but I probably wouldn't if no one was listening. Please rate, like, comment, and share wherever you get your podcasts. I've had some technical issues in the background between series 2 and 3 and lost quite a few listeners, so anything you can do to share would be much appreciated. But thanks for now, and goodbye.